Asking anyone who loves anime and manga what their favorite story is can be one of the hardest things for them based off the sheer amount of options. If you pointed a toy gun at my head and asked, what is your favorite story? I could tell you the story about morally good pirates going against the evil government in One Piece, or maybe I could talk about a middle schooler who's taught how to become the leader of a mafia family in Reborn, or if I decide to go into the manhwa realm, I could talk about the story of a man who got sent back in time to save the world because everyone died and the returnist magic should be special. Yes, that's the name. Or a different story with a similar premise in Doombreaker. But the more I think about it, the more I lean towards this webcomic and novel series titled The Beginning After the End, or Tbate. Tbate is a story that I didn't expect to fall so deep into. It was a pretty slow start, and the art was nothing compared to that solo leveling that I had finished right before. But something kept pushing me to keep reading. To this day, I don't know what that something was, but I can only hypothesize. Maybe it was the lovable protagonist that we watched grow up in the early chapters, or maybe it was the world that seemed to have endless possibilities, or maybe it was the magic system that seemed so simple yet complicated depending on what the reader wanted to decipher. But one thing I know is that as a full-fledged fan and after catching up to over 150 webcomic chapters and 9 regular novels, this is my favorite story. The story is about King Grey, who was reincarnated into a new world filled with magic and monsters and was given a second chance to relive his life to correct his mistakes. But he's faced with the dangers that threaten the new world he has now sworn to protect. Now we all know how isekai all follow some formula and make the main dude busted as all hell just because, but what if I told you that even though Arthur Lewin was busted or is busted, life is not really easy for him in the dying moments. What good is your strength if you don't arrive in time to save the people you gain the strength to protect? But not only that, ever since the beginning of the story, we're shown that despite his skill with the sword and talent with magic, he's still not the strongest. And it becomes painfully obvious when he meets some of the strongest mages in the country. But what's even crazy is that around the same time we're shown that even that level of power is not enough. What I love about path fantasy stories or some shonen is when the hierarchy of villains or antagonists is clearly laid out or ambiguous enough to not make a new enemy an asshole. The best example of this is shown in One Piece with the way Oda set up the admirals, warlords, and worst generation. Now some stories did this well, but others just brought in Kaguya. If I'm talking about isekai, I don't think it would be fair to not mention the magic in more detail than I did before. To explain it better, think of Arthur as an avatar. He's a quadra-elemental mage who has access to some higher tiers of some base elements. Simply put, he can use fire, water, wind, and earth magic, but he can also use lightning, ice, and gravity. Picture a swordsman who enhances his reactions with lightning magic while imbuing his sword with a flurry of ice, fire, and wind with a dragon at his side. I know that might not be enough to convince you, so consider how the landscape of anime has changed in the last few years. Let me put it this way. Do you remember Mushoku Tensei? Well, think of Tbate as his younger cousin, and instead of a pervy protagonist, you get one of webcomics' biggest chads, who also did not get hit by a truck. Now, apart from the biggest difference, some of its similarities will be the mothers who were healers, the childhood best elf friend, and even the way they discovered and learned about magic while being kids with the minds of middle-aged men. And knowing how good Mushoku Tensei is, it makes sense that a lot of shows paid homage to it. But Tbate wouldn't be as good if all it did was repeat elements from other stories. It's a story that's able to stand on its own because of the people we follow. The characters for me are what makes the story so strong. I don't think I've read a story where characters are put in constant situations where the idea of right and wrong is so muddled. And it's not just with the main character. There's constant thoughts of, do you fight to protect your family or the girl you love? Do you make decisions to benefit an entire continent or just benefit your country? What are you willing to risk to gain power? Do you portray yourself as a villain to protect your best friend's heart from breaking? And there's so many more like this. I know I'm being vague with this because I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but for me, there were so many moments in this story where I didn't even know what my answer would be. And I had more answers than the characters involved, which is crazy to think about. The world of Tbate has more to offer, and I hope if you do start it, you give it enough time to grow on you like it did me.